The year was 2087, and humanity had finally taken its first confident steps beyond the solar system. For centuries, people dreamed of reaching the stars, but it wasn't until now that they managed to build a ship capable of venturing into deep space. This vessel, a marvel of human ingenuity, carried a crew of 30 individuals, scientists, engineers, and military personnel, all chosen for their expertise and resilience. Their mission? To explore uncharted regions of the galaxy and bring back knowledge that could change Earth forever. The excitement aboard the ship was palpable as the crew prepared to activate the experimental warp drive. It was risky technology, something no one had ever tested on such a scale before. But risks were part of exploration, weren't they? As the countdown began, everyone held their breath. And when the engines roared to life, the ship vanished in a flash of light, leaving Earth far behind. But something went wrong, terribly wrong. Instead of emerging at their intended destination, the ship was hurled through an unknown anomaly. Alarms blared as the crew scrambled to regain control. Instruments flickered wildly, and the view screen displayed nothing but swirling chaos. Then, just as suddenly as it began, everything stabilized. The ship emerged into a breathtaking vista, a glittering expanse of stars, massive orbital stations, and colossal starships drifting gracefully through the void. At first, silence reigned over the bridge. No one spoke. They simply stared in awe at what lay before them. They had stumbled upon something extraordinary, an entire galactic empire, vast and ancient, stretching across countless systems. The crew exchanged nervous glances. What did this mean? Were they welcome here? Or had they unknowingly trespassed into hostile territory? It didn't take long for answers to arrive. Within minutes, a fleet of sleek alien ships surrounded them, their designs unlike anything the humans had ever seen. One of the vessels loomed closer, dwarfing the tiny Earth ship with its sheer size. A communication channel opened, and a voice, deep, resonant, and laced with condescension, spoke in broken English. "Identify yourselves," it demanded. The crew hesitated, unsure how to respond. Finally, the captain stepped forward, his face calm despite the storm brewing inside him. "We are explorers from Earth," he said firmly. "Our ship malfunctioned during travel, and we find ourselves lost." The reply came swiftly, dripping with arrogance. "Earth? Oh, never heard of it. Primitive species, then. You've entered the domain of the Galactic Empire, and you will comply with our laws." Tension crackled through the air. The crew knew they were outmatched. The Empire's ships bristled with weapons far more advanced than anything humanity possessed. Yet instead of panicking, the humans chose to observe. They listened carefully to every word spoken by the aliens, noting subtle cues in tone and behavior. There was something about these beings, a mix of confidence and disdain, that hinted at centuries of dominance. And yet, beneath their bravado, there seemed to be an undercurrent of curiosity. Why else would they bother speaking to such primitive creatures? Over the next few hours, the Empire sent a delegation aboard the human ship to assess the situation. And these visitors moved with an air of superiority, inspecting every corner of the vessel with thinly veiled contempt. They sneered at the crude design of the controls, mocked the simplicity of the sleeping quarters, and laughed openly when shown the rudimentary food synthesizers. To them, humanity was little more than a curious relic, a backward species unworthy of attention. Yet even as they ridiculed, the humans remained composed. They answered questions politely, offered demonstrations of their equipment, and shared stories of their homeworld. Beneath their calm exterior, however, wheels were turning. Every insult, every dismissive comment fueled their determination. These aliens thought they were superior, but they had no idea who or what they were dealing with. As the inspection drew to a close, one of the officers muttered quietly to another, "They have no idea what they're dealing with." His words carried weight, a quiet promise that humanity wouldn't go down without a fight. Though outnumbered and outgunned, the crew knew they had one advantage: unpredictability. The Empire assumed they were weak, ignorant, and easily controlled. That assumption would prove to be their greatest mistake. For now, though, the humans played along. They accepted the Empire's demands for compliance, nodding politely while secretly plotting their next move. After all, survival depended on patience and timing. Somewhere in the depths of space, Earth awaited news of their journey. Until then, the crew vowed to hold their ground, proving to themselves and the universe that humanity wasn't just another footnote in galactic history. They were survivors, dreamers and fighters, and they weren't impressed one bit. The Galactic Empire wasted no time in asserting its dominance. Within hours of the initial encounter, the humans found themselves summoned to a grand assembly aboard one of the Empire's massive flagship vessels. The ship was a floating city, brimming with advanced technology and bustling with alien life forms. Towering spires of metal and glass stretched into the artificial sky, while holographic displays flickered with data streams that none of the humans could decipher. It was overwhelming, but the crew masked their awe behind stoic expressions. They knew they couldn't afford to show weakness. Not here, not now. As they stepped onto the flagship, escorted by armed guards, the sheer scale of the Empire became even more apparent. The corridors were alive with activity. Aliens of all shapes and sizes moved about with purpose, their movements precise and efficient. Some glanced curiously at the humans, whispering among themselves in languages that sounded like music or static. Others ignored them entirely, treating them as if they were invisible. It was clear humanity had been dismissed as insignificant, a minor inconvenience rather than a serious concern. The delegation led the humans to a vast chamber where the Empire's leaders awaited. At the center of the room stood a towering figure clad in ornate armor, his presence commanding attention. His eyes, sharp and cold, scanned the newcomers with barely concealed disdain. Around him, other high-ranking officials sat in elevated seats, their expressions ranging from boredom to mild curiosity. This was the Empire's ruling council, the architects of a civilization that spanned thousands of star systems. To them, Earth was nothing more than a speck on the galactic map, a primitive world unworthy of notice. The leader spoke first, his voice booming through the chamber. "You claim to be explorers," he began, his tone dripping with skepticism. "Yet your vessel is crude, your weapons laughable, and your knowledge limited at best." He paused, allowing his words to sink in. "We have studied your kind. Your history is riddled with conflict, greed, and destruction. You are not ready for the stars." The humans listened silently, absorbing every word. Though the insults stung, they refused to react. Instead, they maintained their composure, nodding respectfully as if accepting the judgment. Inside, however, emotions churned, and anger simmered beneath the surface, mingling with determination. These aliens thought they understood humanity, but they were wrong. They saw only what was visible: the outdated tech, the small crew, the humble origins. But they failed to grasp the depth of human resilience. When given the chance to respond, the captain stepped forward. His voice was steady, calm, yet laced with quiet defiance. "We may not possess the same level of technology as your empire," he admitted, "but we have something else, something that has allowed us to survive and thrive despite our limitations. We adapt, we overcome, and we never give up." The council members exchanged glances, some amused, others intrigued. To them, these words were meaningless platitudes, empty boasts from a species trying to salvage its pride. Yet they decided then and there to assign humanity a lowly status within their hierarchy, treating them as little more than curiosities. Orders were issued, Earth's resources would be claimed, its people assimilated, and its potential monitored closely. The humans were dismissed without ceremony, left to ponder their fate. Back aboard their ship, the mood shifted. Gone was the forced politeness. In its place was raw emotion. Frustration, anger, and fear bubbled to the surface as the crew debated their next move. Some argued for diplomacy, suggesting they play along until they could find a way home. Others advocated for resistance, urging the captain to reveal Earth's true capabilities and challenge the Empire's arrogance. The discussion grew heated, voices rising as tempers flared. Finally, the captain raised a hand, silencing the room. We can't fight them head on," he said firmly. "Not yet, but we also can't let them walk all over us. We need to be smart, strategic." He paused, letting his words sink in. "For now, we'll do as they say, but we'll make them regret underestimating us." With that decision made, the crew set to work. Over the next few days, they began subtly demonstrating their ingenuity. During a ceremonial meeting aboard the Imperial Capital, one of the engineers repaired a malfunctioning piece of alien machinery using improvised tools scavenged from the ship's storage. The act drew gasps of astonishment from the gathered officials, who had assumed the task impossible without specialized equipment. Later, during a tense negotiation session, a scientist solved a complex mathematical problem faster than the Empire's top analysts, while leaving them stunned and slightly unnerved. These small victories didn't go unnoticed. While most Imperial officials continued to dismiss humanity as irrelevant, a few began to suspect there was more to these newcomers than met the eye. Rumors spread throughout the Empire about Earth's potential, sparking curiosity and unease among the elite. Could this seemingly primitive species pose a hidden threat? Or were they simply clever enough to exploit the Empire's hubris? Tensions reached a boiling point when the Empire issued a new demand: surrender the human ship for inspection. The request was framed as a routine procedure, but the underlying message was clear: compliance or consequences. The humans refused outright, citing concerns about security and sovereignty. Their defiance sent shockwaves through the council chambers, igniting debates about how to handle the situation. Some called for immediate retaliation, arguing that such insolence couldn't go unpunished. Others urged caution, warning that provoking humanity might lead to unforeseen complications. As the standoff escalated, the humans prepared for the worst. They fortified their defenses, reviewed contingency plans, and rallied their spirits. Though outnumbered and outgunned, they refused to back down. After all, they had faced adversity before, on their own planet, against each other, and against the harsh realities of nature. If anything, the Empire's arrogance only strengthened their resolve. In the quiet moments between preparations, the crew reflected on their journey so far. They had come a long way from Earth, venturing into the unknown with hope and courage. Now, as they stood on the brink of a defining moment, a chance to prove that humanity wasn't just another footnote in galactic history. They were survivors, dreamers, and fighters, and they weren't about to let anyone push them around. As the Empire mobilized its forces, the humans braced themselves for what lay ahead. Whatever happened next, they knew one thing for certain: the galaxy would soon learn that underestimating humanity was a mistake, one the Empire would never forget. The Empire's response was swift and predictable. When the humans refused to surrender their ship for inspection, the Council erupted into chaos. Some officials demanded immediate action, calling for the destruction of the primitive vessel as a show of strength. Others argued for restraint, fearing that any escalation might expose weaknesses in the Empire's otherwise unchallenged dominance. In the end, arrogance won out. The Empire deployed a squadron of warships to surround the human vessel, their massive hulls blotting out the stars. It was a clear message: comply or face annihilation. But the humans weren't intimidated. Back aboard their ship, the crew gathered in the main chamber to discuss their options. The room buzzed with nervous energy as everyone shared their thoughts. Some suggested trying to negotiate again, hoping to buy more time. Others pushed for a bold move, something that would shake the Empire's confidence and force them to rethink their strategy. The captain listened intently, weighing each suggestion carefully. Finally, he spoke, his voice calm but firm. "You're what? We've already shown them we're not as helpless as they think," he said. "Now it's time to prove it." With that, the crew sprang into action. They knew they couldn't win through brute force. Their weapons were no match for the Empire's arsenal. But they had something else: ingenuity. Hidden within their ship was a piece of technology the Empire had overlooked, a cloaking device developed in the secret back on Earth. It wasn't perfect, and it drained power quickly, but it was enough to give them an edge. As the Imperial warships closed in, the humans activated the device, vanishing from sight. For a moment, there was silence. Then pandemonium broke out among the Empire's fleet. Sensors scrambled, officers shouted orders, and ships darted around aimlessly, searching for the missing vessel. Meanwhile, the humans watched from the shadows, and their hearts pounding with a mix of fear and exhilaration. They had done the impossible. They had outsmarted the mighty Galactic Empire. But this was only the beginning. Using their newfound invisibility, the humans launched a series of precision strikes against the Empire's forces. They disabled key systems on several enemy vessels, crippling their ability to communicate or coordinate. Each strike was calculated, targeting vulnerabilities the humans had identified during their earlier observations. They didn't fire a single shot. Instead, they relied on EMP devices and hacking tools to disrupt the Empire's operations. It was a masterclass in asymmetrical warfare, turning the Empire's own overconfidence against them. Word of these attacks spread quickly through the Empire's ranks. At first, many dismissed the reports as exaggerations or technical glitches. How could a primitive species possibly achieve such feats? But as more ships fell victim to the mysterious assaults, doubt began to creep in. Rumors circulated about a ghost ship haunting the fleet, striking without warning and disappearing just as suddenly. Fear took root, spreading like wildfire among the crew members of the Imperial warships. Back aboard the human vessel, morale soared. For weeks they had endured insults and condescension, forced to swallow their pride while plotting their next move. Now finally they were fighting back and winning. The sense of empowerment was intoxicating. Every successful strike reinforced their belief that they could hold their own against even the most powerful adversaries. Yet amidst the triumph, there were moments of reflection. Late at night, when the adrenaline faded and the weight of their situation settled in, the crew couldn't help but think about what they were doing. They weren't soldiers. They were explorers, scientists, and engineers. Their mission had been one of discovery, not combat. And yet here they were, locked in a deadly game of cat and mouse with an entire galactic empire. Was this really who they wanted to be? These doubts were fleeting, however. The reality of their situation left little room for hesitation. If they stopped now, if they showed even a hint of weakness, the Empire would crush them without mercy. So they pressed on, pushing themselves to the limit. They worked tirelessly, repairing damaged systems, conserving power, and planning their next moves. Every decision was made with care, and every action executed with precision. They were a team, united by a common goal: survival. Their efforts paid off in ways they hadn't anticipated. As news of humanity's defiance spread beyond the battlefield, it reached the ears of other species within the Empire. These beings, oppressed, marginalized, and long-suffering under imperial rule, saw hope in the humans' actions. For the first time in centuries, someone had stood up to the Empire and lived to tell the tale. Inspired by this example, some began secretly offering support. They provided intelligence about imperial movements, smuggled supplies to the human ship, and even sabotaged key infrastructure to aid the cause. It was a turning point, not just for the humans, but for the galaxy itself. What had started as a desperate struggle for survival was evolving into something greater: a rebellion. Though small and fragile, it represented a spark of resistance against tyranny. And at its heart were the humans, the unlikely catalysts of change. The Empire, meanwhile, struggled to make sense of what was happening. Their leaders convened emergency meetings, poring over data and debating strategies. Some argued for all-out war, believing that overwhelming force would eventually break the human spirit. Others called for diplomacy, suggesting that perhaps humanity deserved closer scrutiny. The internal divisions grew deeper, weakening the Empire's once unified front. In the midst of this turmoil, the humans delivered a final blow. During a daring raid on the Empire's central command hub, they infiltrated the facility and disabled its defenses. It was a risky operation, requiring split-second timing and flawless execution. But the crew pulled it off, leaving the Empire's nerve center exposed and vulnerable. The act sent shockwaves throughout the galaxy, cementing humanity's reputation as a force to be reckoned with. As the dust settled, the captain addressed his crew. His voice was steady, but there was a note of pride in his words. "We've proven ourselves today," he said, "not just to them, but to ourselves. We may be outnumbered and outgunned, but we have something they'll never understand: heart." The crew nodded in agreement, their faces etched with determination. They had turned the tables on the Empire, shifting from victims to victors. But they knew the fight wasn't over. The Empire was wounded, not defeated. And as long as it existed, humanity's place in the galaxy remained uncertain. Still, for now, they allowed themselves a moment of celebration. They had come so far, from accidental travelers to architects of a new era. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they faced them together, driven by the unshakable belief that humanity's story was far from finished. The Empire was reeling. For centuries, it had ruled the galaxy with an iron fist, crushing dissent and expanding its borders without resistance. But now, for the first time in its long history, it faced a challenge it couldn't easily dismiss. The humans, those primitive beings from a distant blue planet, had proven themselves to be far more dangerous than anyone could have imagined. Their tactics were unconventional, their technology surprising, and their determination unshakable. The Empire's leaders scrambled to respond, but every move they made seemed to play right into humanity's hands. Realizing that brute force alone wouldn't work, the humans adopted guerrilla warfare on a galactic scale. They struck at the Empire's supply lines, targeting cargo ships carrying vital resources like fuel, food, and ammunition. These attacks weren't random. They were carefully planned, designed to cripple the Empire's ability to wage war while minimizing casualties. The humans knew they couldn't afford to alienate potential allies by causing unnecessary harm. Instead, they focused on disrupting logistics, leaving the Empire's massive fleet stranded and vulnerable. One particularly daring operation involved infiltrating a heavily guarded convoy transporting rare minerals used in advanced weaponry. The humans deployed drones equipped with EMP devices, disabling the convoy's defenses before boarding the lead vessel. Once inside, they planted false data in the ship's systems, redirecting the entire fleet to a remote sector of space where they would be easy pickings for future raids. By the time the Empire realized what had happened, the damage was done. Resources meant to fuel their war machine were gone, lost to the void. These victories didn't just weaken the Empire, they inspired others. Word of humanity's defiance spread like wildfire, reaching even the most oppressed corners of the galaxy. Smaller species, long subjugated by the Empire, began to see hope where there had been none before. They watched as the humans outmaneuvered and outsmarted their oppressors, proving that size and strength weren't everything. Slowly but surely, whispers of rebellion began to surface. Underground networks formed, connecting dissidents across star systems. Supplies, intelligence, and volunteers flowed toward the human cause, bolstering their efforts. Among these supporters was a group of engineers from a distant colony world. They smuggled plans for experimental weapon systems to the human ship, including designs for plasma cannons capable of piercing the Empire's strongest shields. Another ally provided access to nanobot swarms, microscopic machines programmed to dismantle enemy equipment from the inside out. With each new contribution, humanity's arsenal grew stronger, giving them tools they desperately needed to level the playing field. But perhaps the most significant development came from Earth itself. Back home, scientists and strategists worked around the clock to support the stranded crew. Using quantum communication technology, they transmitted blueprints for cutting-edge innovations directly to the ship. Among these was a prototype dark matter manipulator, a device capable of creating localized gravitational distortions. Though still in its infancy, the technology had the potential to revolutionize space combat. When the humans tested it during a skirmish with Imperial forces, the results were devastating. Entire squadrons of enemy ships were pulled off course, their trajectories disrupted by invisible forces they couldn't comprehend. Each success brought humanity closer to achieving their goal, not domination, but respect. They wanted the Empire to recognize them as equals, not as subjects to be controlled or erased. Yet, despite their growing power, the humans remained cautious. They knew that overplaying their hand could provoke the Empire into launching a full-scale assault, something they weren't prepared to face. So they continued to strike strategically, always staying one step ahead. As the tide turned, cracks began to form within the Empire's leadership. Some factions called for immediate negotiations, arguing that humanity's unpredictability made them too dangerous to ignore. Others pushed for all-out war, convinced that only total annihilation could eliminate the threat. The internal divisions grew deeper, weakening the Empire's once unified front. Public opinion shifted as well, with many citizens questioning whether the cost of maintaining control was worth it. After all, if a single ship from a backward planet could bring the Empire to its knees, what did that say about their ruler's competence? Amidst this chaos, the human captain delivered a chilling ultimatum. Through a broadcast transmitted across the Empire's communication networks, he addressed both the leaders and the people. His voice was calm but firm, carrying an authority that commanded attention. "We didn't come here looking for trouble," he said. "We came seeking knowledge, friendship, and understanding. But you chose to treat us as enemies, to dismiss us as irrelevant. Now you've seen what we're capable of. If you continue down this path, if you refuse to acknowledge our worth, then you'll regret it. We don't seek conquest, we seek peace. But make no mistake, we will defend ourselves. and we will fight for those who cannot fight for themselves. The message sent shockwaves throughout the galaxy. For the oppressed, it was a rallying cry, a declaration that change was possible. For the Empire, it was a wake-up call. The Council convened yet another emergency meeting, their usual arrogance replaced by fear and uncertainty. Some argued that humanity's demands were reasonable, pointing out that negotiation might be the only way to restore stability. Others clung to the belief that surrendering even an inch of ground would embolden other rebellious factions. In the end, pragmatism won out. The Empire agreed to open talks, though reluctantly. A neutral location was chosen, a desolate moon orbiting a dying star, and representatives from both sides gathered to discuss terms. The atmosphere was tense, charged with decades of mistrust and resentment. Yet beneath the hostility, there was a glimmer of hope. For the first time, humanity had forced the Empire to listen, not because they begged, but because they earned it. Back aboard the human ship, the crew reflected on how far they'd come. From accidental travelers to architects of a galactic shift, they had rewritten the rules of engagement. But they also knew that the hardest part was yet to come. Negotiations would be fraught with challenges, and the Empire's willingness to change remained uncertain. Still, they allowed themselves a moment of quiet pride. They had proven that humanity wasn't defined by its limitations, but by its resilience, creativity, and courage. As the ship prepared to depart for the neutral site, one of the officers gazed out at the stars. Her expression was thoughtful, almost wistful. "This isn't the end," she murmured. "It's just the beginning." The negotiations took place on a barren moon, its surface scarred by eons of cosmic bombardment. It was a fitting location, neutral, desolate, and devoid of distractions. The humans arrived first, their ship touching down gently on the cracked gray terrain. As they stepped out onto the moon's surface, clad in sleek environmental suits, they couldn't help but feel a mix of anticipation and unease. This was it, the moment that would determine not just their fate, but the future of humanity's place in the galaxy. The Empire's delegation arrived soon after, their vessel descending with a thunderous roar that echoed across the lifeless landscape. They emerged from their ship in full regalia, their armor gleaming under the dim light of the distant sun. Their expressions were unreadable behind their visors, but their body language spoke volumes. They carried themselves with the same arrogance that had defined them since the beginning. Yet there was something different now, a hint of caution, perhaps even respect. The two groups met in a prefabricated structure erected specifically for the talks. Inside, the air was thick with tension. Holographic displays hovered between them, showing maps, data streams, and proposed terms of agreement. The humans sat on one side of the table, their faces calm but resolute. Across from them, the Empire's representatives fidgeted uncomfortably, their usual confidence shaken by recent events. For once, they weren't the ones dictating the terms. They were being forced to listen, and the discussions began cautiously, each side testing the waters before diving into specifics. The Empire opened with a series of demands, insisting that humanity submit to certain restrictions in exchange for protection and access to galactic trade networks. But the humans weren't about to roll over. They countered with proposals of their own, emphasizing mutual respect, free trade, and safeguards for weaker species within the Empire's borders. Every point was debated fiercely, every compromise scrutinized carefully. It was clear that neither side trusted the other fully, but both recognized the need for resolution. As the days passed, progress became evident. Slowly, painfully, the two factions found common ground. The Empire agreed to lift its oppressive policies toward smaller species, granting them greater autonomy and representation. And in return, humanity pledged to share some of its technological advancements, provided they were used responsibly. Trade routes were established, allowing Earth to integrate into the galactic economy while retaining control over its resources. Most importantly, a formal treaty was drafted, outlining the rights and responsibilities of all parties involved. But the negotiations weren't without challenges. There were moments when tempers flared, when old grievances threatened to derail the entire process. At one point, an imperial official accused the humans of harboring ulterior motives, suggesting that their defiance had been nothing more than a ploy for power. The accusation hung heavy in the air, casting doubt over everything they had worked toward. The human captain responded with quiet dignity. "And we didn't ask for this conflict," he said, his voice steady. "We came here seeking understanding, not domination. What we've done because we had no choice. If you want peace, then prove to us that you're willing to change." His words struck a nerve. Some of the Empire's delegates shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while others exchanged uneasy glances. It was a turning point, a moment of clarity that forced everyone to confront the truth. The Empire's dominance had been built on fear and oppression, but those tactics had only sown resentment and instability. If they wanted to survive, they needed to adapt. In the end, the treaty was signed. It wasn't perfect, far from it, but it represented a step in the right direction. For the first time in centuries, the galaxy saw a glimpse of hope. Smaller species celebrated openly when hailing humanity as liberators who had dared to challenge the status quo. Even within the Empire, whispers of reform began to spread. Change wouldn't happen overnight, but the seeds had been planted. Back aboard their ship, the crew gathered in the main chamber to reflect on what they had accomplished. The mood was somber yet celebratory, a mixture of exhaustion and pride. They had come so far, from accidental travelers lost in the stars to architects of a new era. Each of them bore the weight of that journey, carrying memories of battles fought, sacrifices made, and lessons learned. One of the engineers broke the silence, his voice tinged with awe. "Do you think anyone back home will believe us when we tell them what happened?" The captain chuckled softly, shaking his head. "Probably not," he admitted, "but that doesn't matter. What matters is that we stood our ground. We showed them, in ourselves, that humanity belongs out here, among the stars." There was a murmur of agreement, followed by a reflective pause. Someone else spoke up, their tone thoughtful. "What happens now? Do we go back to Earth? Or do we keep exploring?" The question lingered unanswered, hanging in the air like a promise. The truth was, none of them knew for sure. Their mission had changed irrevocably. They were no longer mere explorers. They were ambassadors, pioneers, and symbols of a brighter future. Wherever they went next, they would carry the legacy of what they had achieved. As the ship prepared to depart the moon, the crew took one last look at the desolate landscape outside. It was a stark reminder of how fragile peace could be, how easily it could slip away if left unguarded. But it was also a testament to what was possible when determination met opportunity. Humanity had faced impossible odds and emerged victorious, not through brute force, but through ingenuity, resilience, and unity. The engines roared to life, propelling the ship back into the vast expanse of space. Ahead of them lay countless possibilities, endless horizons waiting to be explored. Behind them, the galaxy was beginning to heal, inching closer to a future where cooperation replaced conquest and understanding triumphed over ignorance. In the quiet moments that followed, a young officer stationed near the viewport gazed out at the stars. Her eyes sparkled with wonder, reflecting the infinite possibilities stretching before her. She whispered softly, almost to herself, "This is just the beginning." And so it was. Humanity's story in the galaxy was far from over. It was a tale still being written, shaped by the courage of those who dared to dream beyond the confines of their world. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, as survivors, as dreamers, and as fighters. The stars were no longer out of reach. They belonged to humanity now, and humanity intended to make the most of them.